Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's 2 o'clock now, and we should start our meeting. There are a couple of people who I think are expected who will presumably be here in a moment. So welcome to the University Sports Centre, which I think is a definite improvement so far on the aircraft hangar at Duxford, but this is an interesting journey as we go around our area. I would like to report about our membership before we get started, to say that Andy Williams has been appointed as a substitute member for the business community on the executive board, and he had been a member of the Assembly. That means he leaves the Assembly, and I can vouch for the fact that he was one of the original members of the Assembly, and there's a diminishing number of us left. I'm looking in Helen's direction there. But I think you would want to join me in thanking him for his service to this body in the GCP, even though it's going to continue elsewhere. And then obviously that leaves us with a vacancy from the business community on the Assembly, and Claire Ruskin has been nominated to replace Andy Williams and that nomination, I understand, is from the business board of the Combined Authority, and that is an appointment that still needs to be ratified by the board of the GCP, and unfortunately, because of the sequence of events, that meeting has yet to take place. So I think in the knowledge that that is in the pipeline, we've invited Claire to join us in a somewhat unofficial capacity this time, but welcoming her contribution as always. And of course, this is a return to the Assembly for Claire, who was another original member of the Assembly, but obviously has interrupted service. So there we are, and thank you and welcome back, Claire. So the other thing I have to report is that we have been presented with a book by the Histon Road Area Residents Association. This book, called A Community Remembers Histon Road, it's a book which is going to be launched later this month, celebrating the memories of local people around that Histon Road area of Cambridge, and it's going to be accompanied by an exhibition of work by a documentary photographer, Farooq Kara, and that exhibition opens on the 24th of September. We've had contributions to the Assembly from Lillian Rundblatt, from the Histon Road Residents Association at various periods in the past, and I think the fact that we have this is through her, and so on your behalf I'd like to thank her for that and wish her well with the exhibition, which I'm sure is pointing out that roads are more than a way of getting from A to B. They're also the focus of communities. So I'll then move on with the formal business and ask for any apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. There are apologies from Lucy Scott.
From Lucy Scott. Okay, thank you very much. The second item on the agenda is declarations of interest, and I'm asking if there are any declarations of interest on today's agenda. And if none occur now, they can be highlighted when we get to individual items. We then have item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. These are extensive. I've already had highlighted that on page 10 of those, there is no such place as Whittlesworth, and this needs to be corrected to Whittlesford. But I am not aware of any other amendments unless anyone highlights anything. I'm going to try and avoid going through this page by page, which will take some time on its own. Are there any issues or accuracy of the minutes? I don't see any, so I am going to sign those. Thank you. Item 4 on the agenda is questions from members of the public. And I want to report there are 9 public questions accepted for today's meeting. And as normal, we'll distribute those through the agenda to the agenda item that they are in relation to. We have 2 questions for item 6, the quarterly progress report, 4 for the public transport improvements and city access, item 7, and 3 for the experimental traffic regulation orders, which is item 8. Details of those questions have been published on the website and have been sent to members of the Assembly earlier on. Those submitting questions were offered the option of either attending today's meeting in the room or having their questions read out by an officer. And there was a mixture of responses, as you will see, in that respect. The questions are going to be put at the beginning of each relevant agenda item. Item 5 is petitions. Do we have any petitions? We have no petitions. Item 6 is the first of our substantive items, which is the GCP Quarterly Progress Report. And this is in your agenda packs between pages 37 and 65. The report is going to be presented by Niamh Matthews. Where is Niamh? There she is. But only after we've had the public questions that relate to this item. So we're going to take public questions. The officer responds to those questions. I'm then going to ask Niamh to present the report, and then we will have our debate. So could we have the first of the public questions, please? And I think that's from John Grant, and I believe, Wilma, you're going to read that.
Yes, Chairman. The question reads as follows. The question refers to paragraph 13.2 on pages 52 to 53 of the agenda pack and item 7, paragraphs 3.2 and 3.8 on pages 67 to 69. Following the success of the trial in West Cambridge, will GCP consider using autonomous vehicles in Waterbeach to provide transport within the village and Newtown, including servicing the railway station, whether or not it is relocated, and the various industrial and research sites? Will the team also consider the possibility of running the vehicles at a higher speed, probably on dedicated tracks, to link into neighbouring settlements such as North Cambridge and Cottenham? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Speaking today on behalf of CamCycle and our over 1,600 members. Evidence published in July 2021 from the Cycle City Ambition programme emphasises that there is significant potential to grow cycling in Cambridge. The sooner this is unlocked, the sooner benefits could be realised in terms of health, congestion, air quality and reduction of carbon emissions. Therefore, CamCycle's questions on this agenda item seek to press for the rapid delivery of key active travel routes. Question 1. There has been no specific agenda item on the much-needed greenways at any meeting this year. Can you provide detail on the progress of these schemes? And secondly, what are the early interventions which have been allocated 1.75 million for delivery this financial year? Question 2. We're pleased to see progress on the Chisholm Trail, but seek reassurance that Phase 1 will open by the end of 2021. Firstly, what are the significant time risks mentioned in point 10.13? And secondly, when will the bridge over Coldham's Brook and the railway underpass be addressed, and will either require closure of the Coldham's Common Path? Question 3. We'd also like to know more details on progress on the Madingley Road project. Firstly, what is the timeline for completion next year? And secondly, will detailed designs be presented to the Executive Board in December? And our fourth and final question on this item, the objectives of the Smart Signals project 13.7 are confusing. Firstly, how are they prioritising those using sustainable transport, especially pedestrians or those wheeling cycles, when easing motor traffic congestion and reducing idling seems to be the main focus? Item 7, 6.9. Secondly, are the GCP's traffic reduction targets built into junction designs? Junctions are a significant barrier to safe active travel routes and the reallocation of road space because traffic flow at junctions consistently seems to be placed higher than space for people. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of John Grant's question, the trial at West Cambridge was hugely successful. It also, however, highlighted some of the challenges of delivering autonomy on our roads. Clearly, we're in discussions with other partners, and we will be working with agencies like the Combined Authority and indeed Department for Transport as they bring forward a regulatory regime that might enable autonomy in the probably medium term. We nevertheless continue to have an interest in a number of guidance systems, autonomy being one of them, optical being another, and we will ensure that all of the opportunities there are kept under review as part of our integrated programme of delivery. Turning to Anna Williams's questions, so a number of parts of this. In terms of greenways, the spend and the focus for this year has been on getting the designs started and underway, and also seeking to, where we can, acquire land as soon as we can. And I think we've had discussions at the Assembly previously that land is the biggest challenge in terms of delivery of the Greenway scheme. So that's been the process this year. A lot of progress on the Comberton and Haslingfield greenways, and we hope to be able to share that with stakeholders, Assembly and Board in the near future. The greenways all came through the Assembly to the Board last year. When we've completed the design process next year, they will all come back along with the business case analysis that we're obliged to undertake as part of our assurance framework. But as I said, we are planning communications on greenways, and towards the middle to the end of October, we expect we will be in a position to update stakeholders and members. Turning to Chisholm Trail, there is no single risk in terms of final delivery of the project. Supply chain pressures that are being experienced across the country, I think, continue to exist around resources and material, but it is our expectation that the project will be completed as planned by the end of this calendar year. Turning to the Coldham's Common element and the bridge and culvert, we anticipate that will be completed in November of this year, and at the moment it is not proposed there will be a closure of Coldham's Common. Should that change, clearly we'll update people as soon as we can. In terms of Madingley Road, the quarterly progress report target is for completion of design. Members may well be aware that the recent planning application at West Cambridge site has created an awful lot of interplay between the two. That work is continuing, and I'm hopeful by the end of this calendar year we'll have a final design position on that, and that will then be brought back to stakeholders and then to the Assembly and Board for further considerations. And then finally, in terms of the Smart Signals project, and this may be a sort of drafting issue in how we've articulated this, the focus of this project is to deliver benefits for sustainable modes. So what we are doing is seeking to use artificial intelligence to identify and prioritize active and sustainable travel modes and give the benefits, the time benefits of the junctions to those modes. Are there any specific traffic reduction targets built into junction designs? No, it's a general traffic reduction target, but it's something that when we look across our entire strategy and programme, we expect all of our schemes to contribute to. And clearly that will then be picked up as part of your city access discussions today, Chair.
Because I can hear myself so clearly, so I apologise. So we'll move straight on to the presentation of the overall quarterly report from Neve.
Thank you, Chair. So just to quickly introduce my colleague Gemma sitting next to me here, who's here to pick up any questions around the SMART programme should the Assembly have any. So moving on to the report, members will see there's one substantive item at 1.2 that we're asking you to consider today. Just ahead of running through that, and I know, Chair, you'll run through each section of the report in turn, but I just wanted to draw your attention to Appendix 2, which talks around skills in Section 11. The last time you met, we weren't able to give you an update on the new skills contract work because it hadn't been underway for long enough to give any feedback. So just to sort of highlight that now we can. I guess just to say the kind of, despite the fact that the contract has run mostly through the summer period and all of the kind of challenges around COVID, we are already seeing some fairly good progress against the targets. There's already apprenticeship starts, for example, as a direct result of the new service, and we've got 10 or more employers that have already signed up to taking up some of the support that Form the Future are offering to help them get more apprentices. So I think it's good news, really, to share, and happy to take any more detailed questions as you run through the paper, Chair. So just to take you back to the substantive item around the proposal for the sensor network, you'll see the detail of this in para 13.8. Essentially, what we're asking the Joint Assembly to consider is a request to support the first stages of a traffic sensor network, which we're proposing is installed in strategic locations across Greater Cambridge. To give a bit of kind of detail around it, really in preparation for the GCP's next Gateway Review. It doesn't feel like the last one was that long ago, but we must start preparing for the next one, which is in 2025. We need to be able to demonstrate the impact of what we're doing. In the first time round, we talked a lot about progress, but really this time we need to describe our impact. And part of this work will actually form part of that process. Really, it will provide us with a kind of richer set of data than is currently available. It moves away from relying on data that's gathered via current annual surveys that the county carry out. And it really allows us to provide separate counts of cars and cycles and pedestrians and other vehicle types. So it's richer and more detailed, essentially. The proposal is that the network would cover kind of key sites across our patch, including cycle and pedestrian paths. In terms of timescales, and of course subject to views from you and the Executive Board, we're proposing to have run through the relevant procurement process by the autumn, with initial kind of sensors in place by the early spring, and then those sensors in full operation by the summer next year. So that's a bit of detail around that. Chair, if I can leave it there, and happy to take any questions as you run through each section. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Niamh. First of all, I wanted to say that although this is an important item on our agenda this afternoon, the fact that it comes first often sort of soaks up everyone's energies, and we don't have enough time to deal with the, I think, even more strategic items that come up later on the agenda. So please, obviously, everyone has a chance to make a contribution here, but bear in mind that there are other significant items to come, and we don't want to run out of time for them. So what I'm going to do is what I have done before, is to divide this up into the different work streams that are described in this report. So starting with the transport work stream, which is in Appendix 1, and that's from page 43 to 48. Are there any questions or contributions in relation to that? And I would say, as we're starting public member contributions, because of the huge distance that we are all apart, you may have to really wave your arm around if you want to indicate you want to speak, because we're not so close. So, transport work stream. Are there any questions there? I see Karen indicating.
Yeah, I just wondered if we could have some more commentary on the rejection of the West Cambridge package by the planning, please.
Sorry, it wasn't rejected, it was deferred.
Okay.
So it will return to a future planning committee. We're just in discussions with officers of the County Council as to what information is required to answer some of the questions that were raised, and whether it's additional information or whether it's a presentational issue. At the moment, we anticipate it will be the early part of 2022, but as soon as we're able to confirm that, we will.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Ian Solomon.
I was going to ask the same things, or virtually the same thing, so I won't waste people's time.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Any other comments? I've got Neil Shaler.
I just want to ask if there is any update on the residents' parking scheme. We're quite keen at the county to progress this at this stage.
So I have nothing definitive to say at the moment, other than we are in active discussions with colleagues at the County Council, both around the integrated parking strategy that we've agreed to take forward and individual elements such as residence parking.
Thank you. Any other questions on the transport work stream? I don't see any, so we'll go on to the next work stream, which is skills. I see Eileen Wilson. Eileen?
Thank you, Chair. I've just got one point and one question. My point is that I'm really pleased to see in paragraph 11.5 that action is being taken in primary schools. I've always believed that this is the most important place to start giving children aspirations for what they do in later life. So I'm really incredibly pleased to see that. My question is around the apprenticeships. There seems to be quite a variety of people of different ages in different levels and different organisations. It'd be really helpful, I think, to sort of illustrate this for us if we could have some anonymised pen pictures, case studies. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. Brian, I've got Brian Milnes indicating it's on skills, Brian. Okay, we have moved on from that. So let's deal with skills first, and I'll come back to you. Neve?
Yeah, thanks, Eileen. Absolutely. Yeah, we'll do that. And actually, From the Future are coming to the next skills working group. So they'll do that with a smaller group, but we can do that in this paper too next time.
Thank you very much.
Anything else on skills? Okay, so Brian, we'll backtrack and go back to transport. Just this once.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, it was to pick up on a point that...
Could you put the microphone a bit? Yeah.
That Peter meant. Is that all right? Oh, good. Peter mentioned the greenways and the fact that we were looking at land purchase, which can be potentially very protracted. And I just wondered whether you could give us some reassurance on that, or whether the commercial sensitivities or otherwise would prohibit or not to have a fuller discussion, perhaps in public. Just give us an extra bit of information. Because the frustration, of course, is that in some situations, significant parts of the greenway are extant there, and there are missing segments. So we've got a fragmented network, and we'd obviously like to see that the gaps filled as soon as possible. Thank you.
And I think when we've talked about greenways previously, I think I've said the biggest single challenge for the delivery of greenways is land acquisition. So to give an example of the Oakington to Cottenham section, just to pick one example, there's more than a dozen landowners we're in discussions with. So that's the challenge. In terms of, once we've identified that risk, one of the first things we did was appoint land agents, which is why going back to Anna's question earlier on, whilst a lot of maybe the work we're doing this year is not terribly visible, there are fairly active discussions going on behind the scenes to try and mitigate this key risk. in terms of delivering of the greenways, because actually, you know, we could spend a lot of time on detailed design and stakeholders and all that kind of thing, but if we haven't boxed off the land acquisition, that will be the key failure point that we reflect. So I expect progress to be made over the next 6 or so months in terms of being able to articulate more of that into the public domain. But as you understand at the moment, we're in discussions with landowners, and I'd rather not share that detail.
If I may, just a follow-up. So what might be useful, if you could, was to give us, and not now, but at some time when you feel there's been progress on some of those, to give us an idea of those that you might expect in 6 months or 12 months, or just some reassurance to us in terms. So at the moment, you haven't put any figures behind, you know, those discussions. I appreciate you want to be relatively discreet about such things, but it would be still useful, for example, to know that, you know, 50% of the conversations are in late stage, something of that ilk, just so that we've got some idea.
I think that's a fair challenge. I mean, at the moment, the majority of the greenways are scheduled for delivery in 2024, and you as an assembly have rightly challenged me to say deliver them sooner. And I've said land is the issue. But the process at the moment is you move them to the board. The board approved all of the greenways last year. The early part of next year we'll be coming back with an update, and we'll have done an awful lot of the design on all the greenways. And I think at that point it would be appropriate to give, to bring to life the discussions and the issues around land. Yeah, if that helps.
Thanks very much. We'll now get back on track into the smart work stream. Alex Beckett.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, officers, as well. I just wanted to bring up very, very quickly is that I don't think we've had a smart working group meeting yet, and it's just slightly concerning that we, I think, as an assembly, would like to get started on that. It's obviously been quite a while. I think we support, or I personally support the traffic light work, but it'd be really good to be able to examine that within the working group.
Shall we take the other questions on this work stream, and then I'll invite Rachel to
Chair.
But Helen.
Chair, can I? There was a point of information. There is an attempt to convene a smart working group active at the moment. I got emails earlier today.
We'll ask the officers that in a moment. Helen.
Yeah, it's a comment really more than a question. I do think the autonomous vehicle trial was good and successful, and we shouldn't lose momentum on it, and the future plans at the moment look very woolly, and I wonder whether we should be thinking that we would actually put some money into building a short section from one of our own projects, such as perhaps CSETs to one of the research parks, where we could have a short a piece of road that was dedicated to autonomous vehicles, and we might even get the private sector to contribute to having autonomous vehicles. Presumably there's less impediment on private non-public roads to do such a thing, because it would be great if, as part of GCP, we could actually have one of these working in the next few years. Thanks.
Comment that I support the strategic sensing network very strongly. We need to be good at all the things that we're doing here, but also making sure that we do base our changes and trial results on evidence, and new forms like scooters need to be included in there. I'm sure you'll be aware.
Yes, I think the question was probably answered. The dates have been going around. We obviously have a new board member, Austin Adams, who is picking up the lead for SMART. So it's just been a timing issue and getting it in people's diaries. But there are dates. We can't, unfortunately, get everybody together, such as busy lives that people have. But we are, I think there's a date next week. We have an additional problem in terms of our lead officer not being well and in hospital, but we will go ahead with the meeting because we realise that it's desperately wanted.
Thank you. And Neve, would you like to respond to the other point?
Yeah, sure. Helen, just on the AV point. So I think that's something that lots of people want to see, and there are sort of discussions in development around the kind of genome campus to think about how we might be able to do that.
Sorry, thank you very much. And now we go to the housing work stream, pages 56 and 57. Are there any contributions on that? I don't see any. So we'll go to the next one, economy and environment, pages 58 and 59. Are there any points on that report? Ian Solomon?
Just a quick observation on the electricity grid reinforcement. Part of that we agreed was lobbying for changes. Actually, we sort of recognised that this was a really almost absurd situation, and could we use our influence to lobby for changes, which I'm pleased to see that we have done, and received a response. I understand that there needs to be some digestion of what the technical details are in that, but can we just have a sense at least of whether it was positive or more negative, I guess?
Thank you. Rachel, would you like to deal with that?
Somewhere in the middle of that, I think, Ian. So they recognise the problem, and they are planning some consultation happening on changes that might impact on our sort of situation. But I think generally there's probably not the full understanding of high growth areas like ours, and so actually we are hoping to follow it up and request a meeting to discuss it further. So I think we've made that initial contact, and a more detailed discussion would be helpful, I think.
Simon. Thank you, Simon. Rachel?
So just to reassure Assembly members, whilst we did agree to do lobbying, we didn't stop the work of the project as well. So we are sort of, twin tracking progress in terms of putting in interventions that could perhaps be in our own gift to do. That it is a very complex environment, but we are hoping to bring an outline business case back to the Assembly later in the year, hopefully. So we are still progressing it. We are lobbying alongside that because we completely agree with you, the need is urgent.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands on the economy environment work stream. Are there any other contributions in relation to the quarterly update overall? Nope, I don't see any. So I think there doesn't seem to me to be any overriding priority issue that we are raising with the points surfaced just now. Obviously, the questions that were asked will be reflected back to the board, but could I thank everyone for their contributions and thank Neve for the report. So that concludes item 6 on the agenda, and we then get to number 7, public transport improvements and city access strategy, which is in the agenda pack, page 66 to 99. We had, as I said earlier, 4 public questions, which we will invite at the beginning in a moment. I will then ask for officer responses to those questions, and then I will ask for the report itself to be presented by officers, and then we will have our debate. So we will move straight on then with the questions, the first of which is submitted by David Trippett and Roger Turnbull. And is that one question or two questions?
Two questions.
That's two different questions, which Wilma is going to read out, first one and then the other.
Okay. The question from Mr. Trippett reads as follows. At the previous meeting of the GCP, members firmly agreed that eastern access schemes needed to alleviate private motor traffic on the northern trunk of Coldham's Lane, described as one of the very worst congested roads in Cambridge by Councillor Herbert. Extensive free parking at the Beehive Centre, demonstrably inadequate bus services, and the GCP's works to ameliorate traffic on Newmarket Road were all cited as continuing drivers of congestion for Coldham's Lane. Residents continue to suffer from heavily congested traffic and are very hopeful that the GCP will follow its words with actions. What proposals are being brought forward as a result of the last meeting's discussion, and how will this integrate with the extended vision for a future bus network recently published as part of the City Access paper? And the second question I have is from Roger Turnbull. Reads as follows. Page 66 of the agenda gives greater priority to shorter-term bus improvements to promote sustainable transport and reduce carbon emissions. In 2020, Sistra Limited produced the Cambridge Bus Network Report, page 73 of the agenda pack, to meet the GCP target to reduce traffic by 20% by 2031. It proposed 10-minute frequencies from rural villages to Cambridge Biomedical Campus, which aligned with City Deal objectives. Paragraph 2.1.24 of the Sistra report said that the rural bus network was unattractive because it was circuitous and infrequent. It proposed a new X7 service, 4 buses per hour, routed via the A1301, cutting journey times from Great Shelford by about 15 minutes. Figure 32, paragraph 4.3.10 refers. My question is, will the City Access programme meet GCP objectives to reduce traffic by 20% and reduce carbon emissions, identify that the rural bus network is unattractive due to circuitous routes and infrequent services, increase bus frequencies from 20 minutes to 10 minutes on the A1301 corridor instead of bypassing Sawston, Stapleford and Great Shelford as proposed in the CSET study? Does the City Access proposals make the £100 million plus cost of the CSET proposals poor value for money, with an underestimated impact on the green belt and landscape? With minimal modal shift, page 18 of the outline business case, 2020 refers, misleading travel benefits excluding 20 to 30 minutes perceived walking or waiting times, which are longer than cycling journey times, and bypassing the 14,000 population in Sawston, Stapleford and Great Shelford. And that's from the Shelford Rail Option Report. With a negative effect on existing bus services, losing 56% of their passengers. Table 4.3 and para 5.2.2 of Mott MacDonald Update, May 2021 refers. Will the revised CSET economic case include the city access measures in the GCP Do Nothing case, against which the CSET proposals will be assessed? I therefore repeat my Freedom of Information request for the release of 2021 CSET transport modelling results and evidence of revised travel benefits. Thank you, Chairman.
Sorry, thank you, Wilma, for reading those questions. We have 2 more questions from people in the room, and I'd like to invite David Stoughton to come forward and ask his first, please. Good afternoon.
I expect you can hear from, yeah, it sounds like it. Chair, members, the city access strategy makes constant references to promoting walking, but has few proposals that address the barriers that pedestrians face. Reducing congestion and pollution and closing some streets to cars would certainly greatly improve the environment and perhaps encourage walking. However, our survey and outreach at Living Streets, Cambridge, records an increasing number of negative factors that deter walkers, especially the disabled, the partially sighted and the blind. The notable deterioration of footways in the city is a major concern, and we've asked Highways and Transport Committee to assign a portion of its fresh funding to their repair and maintenance, and to removal of street furniture where it creates obstacles. It cannot help that the Active Travel Opportunities report recommends narrowing pavements to make way for new cycle paths, despite the fact that very few pavements in Cambridge are of the recommended 2-metre width. We trust this Assembly will recall that the hierarchy prioritises pedestrians and therefore avoids solutions that diminish space for walking. But it's the increasing encroachment of other users onto footways that causes most concern for our members. Among them, a significant growth in pavement parking since lockdowns, possibly encouraged by increasing in click and collect and things like picking up fast food. But there have been noticeable increases in residential areas too. The growing multiplicity of alternative modes of transport, including private e-scooters, motorised skateboards and spinning wheels, which are either illegal or unregulated, but whose users assume that taking them on footways is permitted, despite the alarm these can cause for pedestrians when they overtake silently. There have also been further increases in unnecessary cycling on pavements. Living Streets welcomes alternative modes of transport that support active travel, where they are segregated from footways, and sees an opportunity to greatly improve first and last mile travel for longer journeys and those involving public transport. Availability of e-scooters at bus stops, for instance, might increase bus occupancy. However, if walking is to increase significantly, the growing encroachment of others must be addressed. And while control of this is split between different councils and agencies and may require legislation, collaborative action is essential. Will this Assembly undertake to coordinate policies to segregate modes of travel and return the footways to the use of pedestrians as intended? Will it work with appropriate bodies to ensure that footways are properly regulated and abuses controlled? Finally, will you explore the potential benefits of integrating legal alternative modes of transport, such as licensed e-scooters, with the public transport system? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Once again, we have several questions within this item. The City Access project is vitally important, but this report raises more questions than it answers. Given the risk of a car-based recovery from COVID and the county's limited carbon budget, the plans and timelines are unambitious. There is no holistic vision pulling together work from local authorities, for example, making space for people and the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan, to deliver a sustainable transport network with integration between public transport and active travel. So our first question. The new bus strategy will see up to 1,150 buses entering Cambridge per day, that's from the Sistra report, which require space for their movements and will create additional conflict with people walking and cycling. Firstly, what will be done to mitigate this? And secondly, what's happened to the plan to extend the core traffic scheme with additional bus gates, which is actually linked from the City Access report? Question 2. The paper states that measures to discourage car use must follow the implementation of alternatives. However, both reliable bus journeys and safe cycle routes depend on traffic reduction. The STEER report suggests an incremental approach that ratchets up incentives and disincentives in tandem. Is this being explored? Question 3. Point 6.9 talks about bringing forward a programme of road space reallocation to deliver a revised network hierarchy that prioritises sustainable modes of transport, building on the active travel fund schemes. So firstly, how does this fit into the City Access programme? Secondly, does the road space management scheme, scheduled for 2023 at the earliest, that's 6.25, does that just apply to the charging elements, or does that also cover the other road space reallocation things? And thirdly, the February report suggested that the draft network hierarchy would be consulted on sometime this year. Is that due to be part of the City Access consultation? And our fourth question. It's unclear why 2 further consultations are needed following the Choices for Better Journeys public consultation. So firstly, what will they involve? And secondly, will options be set in the context of the GCP's traffic reduction targets and their partners' climate commitments, 3.3, so residents can make properly informed responses? Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. So 4 questions there. I'm going to ask Peter Blake if he would go through those, please.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of David Trippett's question, the proposals being discussed today are part of an integrated package to deliver on the challenges that we face in our area that I don't need to repeat around growth, traffic congestion, air quality and the like. The focus of his question around bus services is, yes, there's a lot about bus services in today's report, and the outline proposals that we are seeking to put for consultation would improve bus services in that local area that he's referring to. So greater frequencies, lower fares, new connections, but particularly would also look to reduce traffic levels in the area. And traffic levels are part of the sort of the key issue and the key challenges that he's raising in regarding to Coldham's Lane. So if you are content and if the proposals go through the board, this will lead to a consultation later in the autumn that will consider both opportunities for significantly enhancing public transport, but also opportunities for reducing the level of traffic within both just the Coldham's Lane area, but also the wider Greater Cambridge geography. Turning to Roger Turnbull's question, Chair, it's similar in some respects that this is a part of an integrated whole. We are constructing some projects. We talked about the greenways earlier on. This is about how we manage the city environment. And these requirements, those proposals will meet the objectives that we've set ourselves and the combined authority set itself around traffic reduction, climate, and the transition to zero carbon. The proposed consultation would, as I described, take forward those 2 issues. All future schemes, business case schemes, if the city access proposals would be updated and reflect the city access proposals. All I would say on that is that actually bringing forward significant transformational city access proposals are likely to significantly enhance the business cases of all of our current programme of schemes. Turning to David's question on from living streets and pavements. So clearly the city access proposals are designed to create space for people, looking to reduce levels of traffic and the associated benefits on carbon and pollution, move the city environment away from being car-dominated and far more pleasant environment. The GCP is not the appropriate highway or regulatory body to deal with parking offences and some of the issues that you cite. But we absolutely do have a role to support our partners in that area. So just citing a couple of examples, we're working with South Cambridgeshire on civil parking enforcement, which would deliver some enforcement benefits there. We've been working for some time with City Council colleagues around a spaces and movement supplementary planning document that would really tackle some of the issues that you've highlighted. So I think our role is a supporting role to our partner agencies and authorities, given the rich governance landscape that we have in the Greater Cambridge area. And then finally, turning to Anna's question, and there's a number of parts, so if you just bear with me while I go through this, but the starting point around city access is to deliver a transformational change. And there's a whole host of issues that are wrapped up in this that this Assembly's discussed previously. We've talked about integrated parking strategy required. We've talked about network reviews. We've just done the Cycling Plus consultation. All of those things are a constituent part of the sort of city access programme. The report itself is outlining proposals to significantly reduce traffic levels. It's one of those glib lines that blokes like me in a navy suit read out, significantly reduce traffic levels. But what we're talking about is taking traffic levels down to the point where you can do something entirely different with that space. So whether it's back to David's question on parking, whether it's Anna's question around cycle provision, or indeed part of the proposals here around public transport, because we need to deliver on all of those things to provide that genuine alternative. The exact details of the bus routes will form part of the consultation, and I'm sure will evolve following that consultation. Anna, I think, picked up on a very important point around phasing and implementation plans, and we're not there yet because we haven't agreed on a final package. But if I come forward with a final package of proposals to this Assembly, quite rightly the Assembly will be challenging me to say, what's the implementation plan? Because you can do some things up front, but you've got to do an awful lot of things afterwards if you take the traffic levels down, because you need to lock in that benefits for our active travel modes. So instead of talking about, competing space for cycling and walking, as David was outlining, actually, if you take traffic levels down, you reduce the space to the car, and then it's more space for cycling, walking, and active travel. I've talked about this, the environment being highly constrained, traffic levels being lower, and public transport being an essential part of that. Why 2 consultations? Because it's 2 years now since we did the Choices for Better Journeys, and an awful lot has changed. There's a new mayor, there's a new position on the CAM, there's an emerging local transport plan refresh coming out, revised government situation and position on buses, on active travel. We have a decarbonisation of transport plan that we need to reflect, and clearly there's also been a global pandemic. So we can't just pick up from where we were 2 years ago. What the report tries to do is give a very clear roadmap for the next 12 months, outlining the necessary steps we think are required to deliver on this transformational change in our area. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Peter. Now, I'd like to explain how I propose to structure this debate, because I think it's a very important one, and it's important that we try and arrive at some sort of tidy conclusions to it. So, in a moment, I'm going to ask Peter to present the overall report, particularly embracing the strategic, the overall strategic intentions. If you'd like to turn to page 67 of the agenda papers, I'm going to try and relate it to what it is that's actually on the table for the board later this month. So on page 67, you'll see in section 2.1, there is a series of points A, B, and C, which are the points, the questions, effectively, that the board is going to be addressing, and therefore we are here to provide our guidance and our comment in relation to those points. So Peter, as I take it, is going to be speaking predominantly to little a and the overall report. We're going to then have a discussion about that, to which Peter will respond. After we've done that, I'm going to ask Isabel Wade to speak to the issues relating to sustainable transport improvements, and turning to page 67 again, that would relate, as I understand it, to little b1 and also to C on that. We will then have a discussion about that element of the report, and Isabel will respond to it, and then we will, Peter will come back and will speak to little b2 and 3, which address the the aspects of this which are about creation of road space and funding. So, hopefully that is clear enough for you to target your contributions in the right places. We'll see. But I do think it would help us have a best value debate if we tried to do that. So, to start us off then, that's asking Peter to address the report in total, and specifically little a in that paragraph 2.1. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. So without trying to upset your cunning plan, I have to start with a mea culpa. There are 3 drafting errors in the report. Para 2.1a, the last line says that the package of options is outlined in, and that should just say in the report. It shouldn't refer to individual paragraphs. 2.1c, we have not attached the business case for the zebra bid. And in para 6.10, we refer to paragraphs 7.5 to 7.7, and that should read 6.5 and 6.7. So I apologise for that. In terms of the report itself, Chair, this was last considered in March 2021, and I think in my answer to Anna, actually there's an awful lot has changed since then. In terms of the revised position on the CAM, greater focus on bus services and public health, revised national position, a national bus strategy, decarbonisation plan, walking and cycling policies, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Climate Commission's proposals which have been accepted by the combined authority, but clearly at your last meeting, you were very anxious that this was reconsidered in the context of the wider strategy and programme that we brought before you. Public transport city access is at the heart of what we're trying to achieve in terms of the integrated plan that we've got. It is about refocusing the urban environment away from the private car, creating more space for people, which is better walking and cycling facilities, enhanced public space. It is cleaner air. It's contributing to climate challenge. That part of the requirement is a transformed public transport network, and I'm sure when you come onto the details there'll be lots of comments of it should go there or it should be this or that, but I just sort of hesitantly say, just have in your minds this is about transforming the current offer, which isn't going to meet our requirements. It's doing something markedly different. And of course, it's about supporting that green recovery. And I know you've heard in previous meetings that the car is coming back faster than any other mode. It is still doing that. And in a number of areas across the geography and across the UK, actually car volumes are higher. And I suppose if we all think of home deliveries, that might explain why the sort of white van is 8% higher than it was pre-pandemic, and so we need to be tackling this challenge head on. So the previous work that we've put in front of you has been extensive, and your previous discussions have confirmed, both here and at the executive board, that it's a package approach that's required. There's not just one silver bullet or one single lever, but we do need that transformational public transport offer, significant improvements in walking and cycling, and measures to discourage car use, including considering measures for raising revenue to improve that public transport. There has been extensive previous engagement, and the report refers to that, particularly the Citizens' Assembly and the Choices for Better Journeys. So hopefully, Chair, that's the context for the discussions, and I don't necessarily want to repeat all the detail. Back to you, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter. So I'm going to invite contributions at that level to the report. So if your point is about the detail of sustainable transport improvements, hold on to that. That's not invited at the moment. If your point is about the detail about road space creation and funding, hold on to those points. We'll come to that in due course. But at the overarching strategic level that Peter has just spoken to, are there any contributions to this? So I've got Christopher Walkinshaw first. I see Alex Beckett.
Chair, thank you very much indeed. And Peter, thank you for the report. I welcome the report, and I welcome the strategic point that you've made there, Peter, that we need to lift up here and do something remarkable that will change the future for our city. I would just like to make two parts of a similar point, and I'm afraid they're ones you've heard from me before, but because we're talking at the strategic level there. You touch on the importance of the recovery we're talking about, which reminds us that we do need the recovery to happen. We don't want to stifle that with anything that we do, although we want to help make different choices. But we also need to remember that as we plan this, that we need the extra and an exceptional public transport offering, but the city still needs to function, and for various reasons people need to be able to move around, and in planning that, that really needs to identify the bits that need to flow versus the bits that don't need to flow. If I can put it that way, it's a point that really also relates to some of the experimental traffic orders. Some of those are the result of something being made not to work that needs to work. And the other point I would just say, we need to work out what the strategic routes are that need to work in the city. But the second one is one I've made before, and that is the scale of this. We refer in this report to the 44,000 more jobs. That's 400 more buses during rush hour worth of people, because we need none of those people to be getting into their car. And to do that, it needs to flow. And for that to work, people need to be able to access it. And as we're planning a public transport network, can we please make sure that we plan opportunities for people who don't happen to live right on that route to access those routes so that they can get onto the buses and get into the city that way. I would go on and say it would be great if all of that necklace of access points could be linked up, but that's probably highways rather than us. Thank you.
Thanks, Christopher. Alex Beckett.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, officers. I very much welcome this report and look forward to seeing what city access can do for residents of Cambridge and the wider area in improving their lives. One thing I would like to do, though, is to challenge officers to outline exactly in bullet points as to why we're doing this. And I know that in part 3.2, 3.3, we try and paint a picture of people and what it's going to do, but as a councillor, I am often talking to local residents, and therefore I think it's vital that we paint the picture of how it actually affects their lives and what this city access does for them in a positive way. It's very, very easy as a resident to see how reducing car use affects them in a negative way. It's far harder to see how that happens in a positive way. And I'm talking things like low carbon and stopping climate change. I'm talking about improving health via, lowering PM2.5s and 5s pollution, and about active travel actually leading to fitter, healthier people. I'm talking, one of the other things that we often don't consider is connecting communities. And I think COVID really brought this home to people, how one of the goals we should have for this is how to connect communities. I know I represent Queen Edith's, and it feels a very divided ward because there are the busy roads of Hills Road, Mowbray Road, Babram Road, and that actually tears communities apart. And I think that if we can try and bring out to people a real kind of bullet point aims as to why we are doing this and the effects that it will have on their lives, and if we put this front and center of any consultation, bullet point 1 should be, what is this going to do for me, and why do you want me to support this? Because when I talk to people, I think people at the moment are struggling ever so slightly in places to understand what those positives are and how they do affect them. But I do very, very much support this, but I just want to make sure that we are also painting that picture to the average member of the public around Cambridge and the surrounding areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. I've got Brian Milnes next.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to pick up on one of the questioner's points. Peter talks about a transformation requirement in the way that people access transport, move about. And one of the problems that we are going to have to face is this radical change in the retail environment. At the last meeting at Duxford, I think it was Christopher that mentioned the craziness of an out-of-centre shopping centre in the middle of town. I'm referring to Newmarket Road and the issue raised of Coldham's Lane, because we've seen this big shift to effectively a click and collect environment, But what we're talking about doing is shifting that again to another different model, because you can't get on the bus and go to a DIY and take a bath home. And interestingly, that the last time I tried to do such a purchase of a white good item, I went into Curry's, who referred me to go home and go online because they hadn't got very many of the items I was looking for. I then went to try and buy a bath panel. Same thing, I was told to go online. So what we've got to anticipate is how this actually works in practice for people. So rather than click and collect, we're doing visit or stand and deliver, so that you can actually go and do your shop, and sometime in the next 2 or 3 hours, it arrives at your home. So more white van deliveries at home. And that's going to take some management. So I'm just raising that as a potential issue, because otherwise we may get unintended consequences. The texting revolution that came with mobile phones was completely unanticipated and swamped the networks for a while, and people couldn't make phone calls because there was too many texting. And if we create something of that ilk and don't think through the consequences of what we're doing, we may damage the economy that Christopher raised as an issue. Thank you.
Sorry, Claire Ruskin.
Thank you. Reports like this can be frustrating. Thank you for the report. It's got a lot of detail in, which we've looked at a number of times. I think we need to remember we need to be bold. We need to be roughly right rather than doing nothing or precisely wrong, which is all too easy to fall into. We don't actually need world class, but we do need effective and fair. And then the point of speed and cost versus consultation comes up time and time again. I find it very frustrating, but it is a dilemma. People who take a local position all have very good points. They rarely stop objecting, though, as we've seen through many of our other schemes. I've been surprised how people will continue to object to things. And on the other hand, people who support change for the greater good very rarely speak up, and that's very frustrating to us. Consultation probably won't bring new solutions forward, unfortunately, but people do need to be aware of the balancing act that we have to decide on, and that's where things become very difficult. Brian, you referred to Coldham's Lane. Cambridge has grown so phenomenally fast, and I've been here for all my life. Coldham's Lane used to be out of town.
Thanks, Claire. Heather Williams.
Thank you, and I'll try to make sure I make the right comments in the right space. So I think the future bus network is in the next section. So I'm gonna sort of speak to the. I'll speak twice if that's all right, Chair. But I think what I just want to sort of emphasise is that almost the sort of 10 kilometres or 5 miles or so around Cambridge. None of this is easy, by the way, by what I say, but that is the easy bit to get the modal shift. There's going to be lots of infrastructure in place, there's going to be lots of things, and people are going to be predominantly commuting sort of one way. To me, the real challenge of this, and some may say that's because it's the area I represent, but it is actually the rural area which is the most challenging. So it's because they are the ones that are going to take their cars. If people get in a car, they're very unlikely to go to point A to then go on to point B. They're going to go straight there, and they're going to get as close as they can. Once you're in the car, that's it. And I'm looking for example, on the current system, the way things are, to do a 15-minute journey by public transport would take 1 hour and 25 minutes because there's like 4 buses in, 5 buses out to then get to a station to then go somewhere else. And cycling, etc., isn't, it's just, and walking is not a feasible option. So I do think we need to really not see the rural areas as a secondary thing that just sort of sorts out what we can. If you want change and you want to reduce the cars into the city, that area probably needs more focus, or as much focus as you can give it, and will be the more challenging to achieve, because there's not, there's just not anything in a lot of places at the moment.
Thanks, Heather. Oops. I don't see any other hand. Oh, Rosie.
Thank you. Thank you for this report. I absolutely agree that we really need a transformed public transport network, plus an improved space for people generally, and that there are many co-benefits to be had. But I do, and I agree wholeheartedly that we need to go through with this consultation, even though other consultations have taken place. But I do have concerns about the speed, because I feel that really we do need this now. We of course need to get it right, and as has been alluded to previously, one of the issues and reasons that we've had many delays is the complicated governance or responsibilities here in Cambridgeshire, and I just wonder whether there is a real opportunity for GCP to take the lead in Greater Cambridge on transport and highways, and streamline the process a little bit. I think I have some concerns, for example, over the current county's consultation on modal filters, and I wonder where that fits into this. And so GCP taking the lead, what are the opportunities really for that? Thank you.
Thanks, Rosie. And before I ask Peter to come back and comment on that selection, I'd just like to add my own comment. I mean, the first point is quite a minor one, but it's quite an annoying one that keeps coming up in our papers. So the description of this strand of our strategy is city access, but it keeps on showing up elsewhere in our papers as city centre access. And I think as the report contents actually show us that it is a bigger subject than the city centre, and I just would ask that an effort can be made to stop calling it by the wrong name, because I think it is misleading to people. The second and perhaps more substantial point is that I share some of what Rosie just said about impatience to get on with this, and yes, for the GCP to take a lead. I think the real dilemma from here is about this consultation process that is being proposed for later this year, because I think to many people it is going to strike them as something asking them questions that they've already been asked previously in our previous exercise, and I'm quite concerned about consultation inertia creeping into this if we aren't careful. I mean, I've listened to the point about the 2 years in between. A lot has happened, and I get that, and that sort of delay means that somehow there's a feeling that we need to sort of renew our mandate from the public in terms of their views. But I think, so reluctantly, I agree that we need to do this consultation this year for that purpose, but I do think that it's going to require that consultation to be designed in a way which doesn't give people the impression they're just being asked things they've already given answers to. I think there is going to have to be a real effort to make this fresh and compelling, and if possible punchy, because otherwise I fear that we will get the results of people feeling tired of the subject rather than actually people's views about the subject, which is what we really need. So my question really is to Peter, can we do everything possible to make sure that this consultation that is being proposed, this first stage consultation that's being proposed, is something that doesn't generate this feeling that we've been told, we've been asked this before and we've given our answers? Okay, so I'm going to pass over to Peter to pick up all of those points.
Thank you, Chair. I'll do my level best. In terms of Christopher's point about scale, absolutely right. And, you know, we often forget that prior to the pandemic, we were looking at 25 to 30% traffic growth by the end of the decade, and yet we're talking about a target of 15% reduction. So this is not small scale. We just need to keep that in our mind. Alex and Y absolutely agree. And when we, at the risk of upsetting the chair and talking about a previous consultation, when we did the Choices for Better Journeys consultation, we used personas. So we said, you know, I'm a hospital porter. How does this impact me? You know, good and bad. And I think that we got an awful lot of quite positive feedback on that because it brought it to life. So that's certainly what we're looking to explore again in terms of the why question. And in part also the consultation fatigue point that has been raised. I think Brian and Heather just raised some of the challenges, whether it's Coldham's Lane or it's sort of the rural area. The challenges are different, and the response needs to be a little bit different. I mean, I would say, going back to the point around the park and ride deferral, that actually park and ride in this area has been hugely successful. Unlike many other parts of the UK, hugely successful in this area, and actually people driving to them, as long as there's the assurance that they're going to be regular, reliable, and frankly they don't stop at 7 in the evening, because that doesn't suit modern life. So again, that's part of the sort of proposals that we've got. I think Claire's point around awareness is essential. It sort of balances with the chairs and the vice chair's point about the sort of consultation fatigue bit. I have to say, as an officer, it's important we get the process right, and you know, not necessarily getting the answer we think we want. Let's get the process right. Let's articulate the issues. And I think that given the length of time and the change that has gone through, just to jump to a final consultation, as much as we might all like that, just get on with it. Actually, I think we just need to balance that off and make sure that we have the opportunity to bring to all of our communities what the issues are, and then hear from as many of those voices as we possibly can. GCP taking the lead is somewhat above my pay grade. What I would say, though, is that we do operate in a rich governance environment, and we just need to work together. And I think there's a lot of examples of where we've done that. Clearly, we need to keep going around that loop and making it better. And that's all I'm going to say on that one, Chair. Hopefully, I've covered most of the main points.
Thank you, Peter. I just want to abuse my role as chair just to push my point about how are we going to make this sufficiently compelling to get people's input.
Sorry, Chair. So one of the reasons why we're putting out so much detail around the public transport, because we've not done that and consulted on that before, and we're going to get a wide spectrum of responses. Yeah, I like this, you've missed this, what about this area? Fares are really important to me. But I think that will give a richness that will feel really quite different in terms of previous consultations. But also, we'll really start to hone what the final set of proposals need to look like for people to sign up to the wider package. So hopefully that will respond, Chair.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'm now going to go on to the next segment, which you've given us a very nice link to. So I'm going to ask Isabel Wade to present those parts of the report that deal with sustainable transport improvements. They're represented chiefly in paragraph 6.4 to 6.8 and reflect B1 on page 67 and C. So over to you, Isabel. We will then have a debate about what you've said.
Great, thank you, Chair. So the paper sets out a future bus network concept which would deliver a transformation in local bus services across and beyond the Greater Cambridge area. which is based on the work by Sister published in 2020. And I think it's probably fair to say that as much work has gone into this diagram, it doesn't really do justice and doesn't really put across exactly kind of what that scale of change is. So I just want to kind of try and bring it to life a little bit more for you. So what this would mean is that most market towns, most larger villages would have 6 services to Cambridge an hour instead of the usual 2 services. They'd have more direct links to places like CBC and the hospitals, the Science Park, the west of Cambridge site. They'd also have express services, so that would cut about 30 minutes off a typical kind of journey time from some of the larger towns and villages into the city, so quite a considerable gain. In terms of the rural villages, and picking up Heather's point from earlier, they would go from having only a small number of services a day, and I know lots of places have 1 service a day, 2 services a day, sometimes even only 1 or 2 services a week, or even no services, aiming to go to an hourly service, which would run into the evening, so kind of 10 times or more the number of buses that places are getting at the moment. And that would include villages' services that connected into higher frequency hubs, such as rail stations and park and ride sites, but also kind of connected up local villages as well. Within the city, there would be more direct services to the main employment areas as well as to train stations, and services would be operating on at least a 10-minute frequency, and on some routes you would have a kind of turn-up-and-go style frequency as well. There would be more direct services taking less circuitous routes, and we're also looking at how we could bring forward more local services, kind of community services, possibly using smaller vehicles to pick up some of those shorter trips that people want to make kind of across and between neighbourhoods that aren't kind of on the standard public transport network at the moment. Across the network, services would run from 5 a.m. till midnight, giving people the confidence to use the bus for their whole day's journeys. And we're also looking at fares. So the CPCA's strategic bus review found that a £1 flat fare in Cambridge City would see an extra 1.6 million bus journeys a year. Alternatively, a 25% reduction in fares across Cambridgeshire would mean an extra 2.5 million bus journeys a year. So there are kind of various options that can be looked at around kind of targeted fare reductions or kind of across the board fare reductions. And that's one of the things the consultation will want to explore. So this would, the fare changes would build on the service changes to make the bus not only a reliable and attractive alternative to the car, but, you know, for many people cheaper, hopefully the obvious choice for many, many more people. And the paper is clear that such a transformative network has a significant cost, potentially up to £40 million a year, depending on the level of change to fares and services. And GCP could forward fund some of that network. We've talked about that before, and that comes back to the phasing point. But of course, an ongoing revenue source is required, and that's the next part of the discussion that Peter's going to introduce shortly. The new buses would need to be zero emission to avoid worsening the city's air quality alongside transitioning the existing fleet to greener vehicles. And the Combined Authority has submitted a business case for funding from the Department for Transport's Zero Emission Bus Regional Area Fund, which has the fantastic acronym ZEBRA. So, as Peter said, we didn't attach the business case to the paper, but I just want to say a little bit about it so you have some details. So the bid to the Department for Transport seeks just under £4.3 million towards the purchase of 30 new electric buses, which would be used primarily on the Park and Ride and the City 2 routes, because basically they are kind of busy, high-volume routes that spend a lot of time in the city's air quality management area, which is where the air quality is worse in the city. The bid also looks to provide charging facilities at bus depots and at Bayburn Park and Ride, and if successful, the CPCA are hoping to have the buses operating from next year. So the paper for the Executive Board will seek agreement for £2.25 million of match funding as a contribution to this bid, which would sit as part of a total match funding pot that also has contributions from the CPCA and operators in it too. And the business case for the scheme is publicly available, and as a decision-making body, the Exec Board paper will obviously include that and reference that. So just to finish, I just wanted to kind of touch on the consultation. We've talked a bit about it in response to kind of questions already, but we are looking to outline the bus network in changes in a lot more detail, so kind of breaking down this map by kind of corridor and area and really showing people what the services in their local area could look like in the future and seeking people's views on that. So asking about changes to the services, what operating hours people want to see, what do they want to see from fares, as well as kind of starting to look into some of the principles around funding for the new network. So that's all I wanted to say in terms of introduction. So thanks, and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Isabel. So I've got three people indicated already. I've got first Heather Williams, then Eileen Wilson, then Heather Richards. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. This is the first time, actually, from a local member perspective, that I've actually been able to contribute, and that you've come as far my way, so thank you for that. But what I was going to say is that I do feel that for the, I've got to get my directions right, the southwest part, there is quite a bit missing, and it is an issue because I can use the example of myself. I went to university at ARU, and I lived, obviously, where I represent almost then. And you didn't go to the train station because by the time you paid for parking and your train ticket, it was extortionate. I didn't do park and ride. I tried it a couple of times, but you get stuck in so much traffic in the bus that you especially at 18, you'd rather sit in your own car in the traffic rather than on a bus. And you know, and there was no way of getting to a train station without the use of a car anyway. So you know, that's one of the sort of examples that we're at. One train station that isn't on here, which I think would be worth exploring, is the Asheville and Morden station. It's on the King's Cross line. However, unlike the other train stations where it would be in a village with quite a high, it's actually in the village of Odsey, even though it's named Asheville and Mordens, which has 30 houses in it. So it's not, you know, it's a very small village, but they have over 100 cars every day parked on verges, and a Mini manages to get in a chicane, which is actually rather impressive, though probably not very safe. And you know, so it's obviously used, but there is not a single bus that goes to that train station. And other people would perhaps be more inclined to use it. Also, the Guildham Morden to Biggleswade. Guildham Morden is 15 minutes from Biggleswade. But public transport, you would have to go from a bus to Royston, a train to Hitchin, and then a train to Biggleswade in order to get a 15-minute journey. So where you've linked other areas, it might be good to explore that. And I really would look at those smaller stations, and if you can get some connecting there. Because from places such as Guildham and Steeple, if you're not going onto the train, then you're more likely to actually carry on into the city. I agree with the park and ride. It has been more successful, but I think the problem is those congestion hours. I think it's successful, obviously, for a lot of tourism and things like that. If I was going to Cambridge for the day to go shopping or something in leisure, but I probably wouldn't use it for commuter purposes. Realising I spoke for quite a while, so I'll try and speed myself up, but train times with buses, it's a constant frustration that actually the timetabling. So, for example, the last bus that comes to Litlington from Royston is 5 minutes before the train arrives for the first commuter train of the day. So some sort of joining up and looking at the timetabling, I appreciate the fares, but I think if we want this to work, and we need it to work for all those environmental and other reasons, just sheer quality of life, then we need to sort of try and marry that up. And I think that, and it would be interesting to see how many people coming into the city, not the city centre, Chair, just the city in general, are whereabouts they're coming from, and yeah, so obviously knowing my patch well, most people drive into Cambridge rather than train. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Heather. And next I have Eileen Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of comments. My first one, very similar to Heather's. I was at a parish council meeting a few days ago, and I mentioned about this meeting and what we would be looking at. And I mentioned one of the suggestions, which was an hourly direct service into Cambridge. And they said, yeah, that's very good, but that's not enough. That's not going to get people out of their cars. What we need is not always to go into Cambridge. We need to go to other places. We need integration with other services. We need decent fares that compete with parking charges or with the cost of running the car. And they were just falling over themselves to give me ideas of what they would want in an integrated transport service. And so what I take from that is to come back to Claire, be bold, and to also use parish councils, because parish councils really know their communities as well as the local councillors. To go on from that, another village that I represent had its one bus a day terminated during the epidemic, and they've been pleading for it to come back. And I wrote Stagecoach, and I was told they might get it back in November. These are people where teenagers don't have the autonomy to go out and come home. They take in paying student guests. They can't do that because the students can't get back to the village. So whatever we do, we need to make sure that these villages understand and can trust in what is going to be happening, because we have a real trust issue here. If the services can be terminated and cancelled just like that and not be reinstated, people feel powerless and they feel isolated. And to add to that, on this map, the Future Bus Network concept, there are 3 villages in the area where I live which aren't on that map, and I was pleased to hear that this map is going to be sort of further enhanced to show some of those villages. But some of these smaller villages, it's very difficult for people living there. They have to have dual cars and they just can't get out and about. So these are the people that we really need to think about as well when we're looking at the bigger villages, that's where we can get wins to get people out of their cars. Because it's right, once people are in their cars, they stay in their cars. They're not going to get out unless it's very, very simple. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. Heather Richards.
Thank you. I'm going to echo, I think, some of the comments that we've already heard, but I think they're worth emphasizing. I think particularly in the consultation, it's going to be critical to bring to life what we mean by this interconnected travel network. And it's great to see on the map, and I think it's one of the only ones that have been brought to the Assembly, where you can see the overlay between the cycle networks, the greenways, the new proposed bus routes, and that's brilliant. But I think, at least in conversations I've had, where there is a lot of concern is where those interconnected points are going to be between things like rail and bus services. And more the idea keeps coming up in terms of that last mile. So you think of the number of bus services that are being proposed here in terms of increase by thousands. The question is, where are all those buses going to go? Surely they all can't be conjoining somewhere within the city center itself. So what, as part of this proposal, are we going to be putting forth as a solution to get people to that last mile of their journey, or if it's not the last mile of their journey, to that interchange that is going to be required to continue? Because I think otherwise we're solving from point A to B journeys and nothing beyond that, which I'm afraid isn't going to get the number of people required out of their cars.
Thank you, Heather. Alex Beckett.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to come back to your point earlier about the naming of this scheme. I know you obviously pointed out that it's city access, not city centre access. I actually think one thing we need to be careful of is that this isn't just about accessing the city. It's also for people that live in the city being able to get around. It's essentially city transport. And I think that's really important. I think the more I talk to people around, they they kind of see most GCP schemes as being something for people outside Cambridge coming in. Now, as we start to talk about congestion charges or other things like that, obviously it becomes key to those people that we do have alternative options from them. Peter, I think I've heard stats in the past from you that it's something like 50% of local journeys are from local people. So therefore, we need to be able to help those people get out of their car. I mean, I know today, personally, I live in Romsey. To get here by public transport, when I looked it up, was going to be 1 hour and 20 minutes from Romsey, which is, you know, frankly ridiculous living so many miles. It's 20 minutes in the car. That I ended up taking a scooter, but not everybody has that option. So we need to make sure that those local routes come in. I know, Isabel, you were talking about some of those small buses. I would challenge the GCP to actually come up with a more zoomed in map so as we get more details of those, because at the moment when you look at that, it's all about outside of Cambridge. There's very, very little from people inside Cambridge. I know also as well in one of the working groups we talked about bikes on the front of buses. Again, it's those multi-mode travel for people that live within the city, which is going to be incredibly important, kind of bringing this forwards and selling it to people as ways to be able to get around. One of the other things that I think we do really need to think about as well is access for city centre residents or city residents that want to get out of Cambridge. Again, city access, this seems to think a lot about people coming in. As we think about congestion charges, it's also going to be very important to think about people wanting to get out of Cambridge. I know myself, I have friends where one member of the family works in Cambridge, the other one works outside Cambridge at somewhere that isn't currently accessible by our public transport. And we need to make sure with this that we have some options or at least some thought about how we can help those people, because they are people, if you are living within any congestion charge, it's obviously going to be incredibly effective on you. So therefore we need ways of them to be able to leave their cars at the periphery or not be able to take cars in general or have other access. The park and ride, for instance, just doesn't work in reverse at the moment. It doesn't serve local residents, it serves the city centre. So we need to make sure that that's all connected in so that people that live locally do have an option as to where to leave cars that isn't the centre and have an option to not drive within Cambridge itself. But I think in general, people in the city are very excited about what this could bring. We just need to make sure that we don't necessarily solve everybody's use case, but that we have broad brushstrokes that can help people with their most common journeys that they have to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Helen Valentine.
Thank you. If we do get this bus network, it will be transformational. It will also be very expensive. And I do think we need to be very explicit about that right from the outset in terms of consultation, that this will only be sustainable when accompanied by a revenue source, so that people don't get all very excited about all these cheap new buses and not realise those two things go hand in hand. And I'm also, I guess, concerned about the phasing of all of this. We've always said, and I agree, that we need to be able to provide the improvements in public transport first. But if we decouple these things for too long, what we will have is a very expensive set of new buses on very busy roads, and I guess not very many people getting out of their cars to get into these buses that are stuck in traffic. And I think that's going to be quite tricky, but it seems to me that we need to bring the revenue source on stream pretty soon after we get these new buses running. And we haven't really talked about that as yet, how closely coupled or how decoupled we see those two phases happening. But I think it's crucial, because the worst thing we could possibly do is get new buses on the road that don't work because nothing else has changed, and then we'll have quite a lot of people who perhaps aren't very keen on this whole plan saying, what a waste of money, nobody's using the buses. Thanks.
Thank you, Helen. Brian Mills.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ensure that Whittlesford residents either listening online, hopefully not. It's already been mentioned that it was misspelt as Whittlesforth rather than Whittlesford. And also it's missing from the bus network map as a multimodal change. But there's a serious point in there because if we, there was a master plan that was developed for Whittlesford Parkway, which the local rail user group that I'm a member of was disappointed with in terms of ambition. Perhaps one of the reasons that Whittlesford Parkway is missing from the bus network map is there's hardly any buses that actually stop there. There's no service to the Imperial War Museum. And it's just an example of where we want an opportunity for multimodal shift that's not being developed in a really sustainable way. And I don't know if I'm the only one here that actually does shift from car to bus. So I use the park and rides both from Babraham Road and from Trumpington. And it's actually quite a successful method of getting in. There are reservations about getting back out. The last meeting I came to in Cambridge City Centre, I went back to catch the bus and had to wait 55 minutes for a return journey. And it was the last of the day, so a little bit risky. I've now got a pass to get onto the Voi scooters, which I enjoy immensely, but not on the roads, only on the surfaces, for example, next to the guided busway. And that's a serious issue as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Neil Shaler.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to say that I like Rosie's comments, and if it's above the pay grade to control us all, at least to be in some way aware of the central position of the GCP and to coordinate. I'm in committees on obviously the combined authority and highways, and there's quite a lot of duplication and a little bit frustrating that we're not working together as well as perhaps we could. Well, I think we're working better than we were, but anyway. On the buses, I realize that this sort of overlaps with some of the making space, and I love this phrase on 68, 3.4, lower traffic levels open up the opportunities to create more people-centered spaces. Then if we go down a bit to 3.8, there's a phrase here which I absolutely disagree with, a sentence which is critically, improvements to the public transport network must be made before major changes in road space reduction are progressed. I think we've seen, and this also talks to some comments from members about buses stuck in traffic. Just by reducing traffic, it makes the existing buses more efficient. They run on time, and I've asked people, and there's also other options. People use bicycles and other means when the street space becomes safer, when there is options there. Also, we have the Voi scooters and bikes already being taken up. So I think while it's a tricky kind of a dance, I don't think we should be afraid of, in some cases, reducing traffic first.
I think we're in danger of going into the next section there, actually, Neil. So that's your go. Got Rosie Moore next.
Thank you. So I think that this looks like a really positive start, and I just suppose that if it was maybe made clearer that this is the priority routes of where to start, and that once, if hopefully in the near future this is achieved, that then there could be other hubs, other bus routes. Because I suppose otherwise, if that's not made clear, that there's the possibility that people that live in areas that aren't served by this, that will be the only reason to discount it, rather than thinking we start with this and then we expand and progress as the city is likely to do. And I'm from London. In London, obviously, we have a very different public transport service to here, but it's totally normal that everybody uses the bus, or most people also use the tube, the train. And I was struck coming to Cambridge how it's just not really in the culture for people to use public transport. And obviously that's because there isn't suitable public transport to use. But I just wonder whether, if all of them have got the fare proposals, if by starting with young people having free travel, it would start a culture change, because then they would use transport, but also it might also then encourage families, because if it's cheaper to drive into the city centre and park in the car park than it is for your whole family to get the bus, it will promote that modal shift. And I think that one of the problems of it not being in the culture is, as was mentioned, when you use public transport, it's unlikely that it's going to arrive outside your front door and take you directly to the place that you want to go. It's not door to door, and that's the reason you get some of the co-benefits to health, is because you have to walk more, and that's not perhaps understood, or we need to get that cultural shift, that it is a bit more difficult, but actually there are some benefits to that. And I think, so I would ask, can we do something about free travel for all young people as a start with the system that we've already got?
Thanks, Rosie. Claire Ruskin.
Being blunt, people want the best we can realistically afford for all public services. They want the best hospitals, schools, roads, access, etc. And I think in the consultation it's clear that most people will agree to all the positives that we're putting forward here. There will be some gaps, and we've all got gaps that we could mention, but it is very, very much more positive than the current enormous gaps we've got. Moving on from the positives, I think we really need to consult with people on the likely costs and the other penalties to have a real balance of views. So we can put the positive vision forward very nicely. People will want that, but we know that even one road closure, a very small road, causes remarkable objections. We've got to get to the reality of the costs and the other penalties. Thank you.
And we will do in a moment, so yeah, good timely point. If I could just add in my own comment on this section. The subject is capacity for buses in the city centre. I mean, I would like it if the consultation could at least recognise that there will be necessary new ways of providing bus access and egress in the city centre, based on the implication that we are looking at a larger number of buses more frequently going in and out. Now, I do, before I can hear the reply coming back from the officers, yes, but we're going to have some more services going direct to other points in the city, apart from the city centre, which of course is good, and that's going to help. But I do think that the range of improvements we're looking at still seems to me to represent quite an increase going to the city centre. And I mean, there's a danger that we all expect you to design to the nth degree before having a high-level consultation, and I'm not asking you to do that, but I do think that it would be appropriate to forestall a natural reaction from quite a lot of people. Where will the buses go in the city centre? Just to say that we envisage dealing with that after we've got the high-level input from the next consultation. I mean, in my own view, we should be looking eventually at some ideas like having buses stopping on the outside perimeter of the central area of the city, taking up actually Rosie's point that walking is no bad thing and has benefits of its own, but perhaps supplementing it by a minibus circulating or minibus service circulating within the central area, which is more consistent with some of the historic streets and buildings. But that's just floating an idea, which I'm doing shamelessly, but I just think that we need to signpost that there will be a recognition of that, and we will address that when the time comes. And then the second point I wanted to make is that this is a very, I think this is a very good section to the report. I think it's good that we aren't limiting the envisaged improvements to bus services to just to the Greater Cambridge area and within that boundary, because that's not the natural boundary that people live and commute within. I think the consequence of that is that we need some assurance that there will be special attempts at consultation in those other areas, even though they're outside the Greater Cambridge area. And I'm thinking particularly of within East Cambridgeshire, which is the district which comes closest geographically into the heart of our geography. And sometimes there is some frustration, they feel not represented here. So I think I'm asking for some acceptance that there will be a special attempt to capture input from the East Cambridge district, at least those parts of it that would be impacted by these bus service improvements. And the point could equally well be made in the next section about the road space and the funding things as well. So that's another point on the end. So Isabel, would you like to come back on all the points, all the many points?
Great, yeah. I'll give it a go. There's a lot of points been made, but thank you first of all to kind of Heather and Eileen for some of the detail of your areas. I think that there's some useful suggestions that we can look at there in terms of kind of that map and then how we bring it to life for the consultation. I think particularly the point about integrating with train, and also Heather's point about integrating with cycling as well. That's certainly the ambition of the network, is to be able to kind of link up much more there. Parish councils, we're looking at how we engage with parish councils as part of the consultation, so we will be picking up conversations with them to get their kind of local knowledge and input as well. In terms of the kind of wider links for kind of places not in Greater Cambridge, which is Tim's point as well, I think absolutely the point of the network is to kind of pick up the travel to work area, and I think we were quite successful in Choices for Better Journeys in terms of getting responses from people who lived kind of in the city, in South Cambs and in the wider area, so very much kind of looking to repeat that for this as well. Just kind of to pick up the points around kind of within the city, I think certainly any references to city centre access rather than city access are kind of not intended, and I take the point about it's about everyone in the city moving around as well as people coming in. I think we've never found a better name than city access, but I'm kind of open suggestions, and obviously we'll be kind of trying to reflect the nature of the changes in terms of kind of how we present the consultation to people as well, and kind of picking up some of those kind of detailed changes within the city too. So I think we'll come on to some of the points around kind of ensuring cost in is kind of well explained in the consultation, and I think that things like phasing as well, certainly that's certainly something that we've been looking at. I'll just check what else. I think that in terms of kind of Rosie's point about the network here and kind of the culture for public transport, I think again the consultation can explore some of the options around fares, but certainly targeting it at particular groups who are more likely to be kind of willing to try public transport, give it a go, is a point. I think there is something about a lot of people in this area will have never taken a bus before, and we're telling them that the bus is going to be how they're going to move around in the future. So painting that picture of the benefit is really important as well. Yeah, and I think finally just on the city centre, I think you're right, we can't design it to the nth degree, but certainly we will look at how we can reflect that in the consultation. The sister report did look at some of the issues around the city centre and kind of some of the options, which did include things like how you might be able to take advantage of lower traffic levels in general, kind of routing as well, so we can pick some of that up too.
Thanks very much, Isabel. I'm got an angry Ian Solomon over there who believes I missed his hand. So Ian, quick question before we move to the next section.
It is very brief. It's just an observation that there's lots of talk about lengthening hours, sort of provision for additional route services. One thing that we've sort of talked about in the past, and I'd be interested gets picked up in the consultation, is around potential for on-demand services. It's just not mentioned in there. I just want to make sure that it's picked up in the consultation. It may not be something that interests the public, but at least we can find that out if we could.
Yeah, I think that will be. I know the Combined Authority about to do a demand responsive trial in West Huntingdonshire, and we're kind of looking at that, and you know, it's something we can certainly test out in the consultation too.
Okay, thank you. So that brings to the end that section of this report. Now we still have Peter, who's going to introduce the section on road space and funding, but I do think that probably it would be appropriate to take a 5-minute break at this point. I'm sorry about breaking that up, but I just think that we have another item after this, and so it would be considerate to stop for 5 minutes. So please, could I have people back at 4 o'clock? Prompt. Thanks very much. Waiting for Peter Blake, actually. But let me give you some important news whilst we're waiting for Peter. That we have been surprised to learn that the building management here is expecting us to be out shortly after 5 o'clock. So it's not a clever invention of the chair to get you to all shut up, but it is going to be necessary that we... Well, that could well be right. Yeah, I don't think we'd be so good at that, some of us. But your cooperation is required because we are effectively need to finish our business within an hour. Well, I can't describe the problem much longer, and I don't want to invent Peter's presentation. But here we go. So Peter is going to present the last part of this report, which speaks to the creation of road space and funding, which was little b2 and little b3. And if Peter isn't too out of breath...
Thank you, Chair.
Go ahead.
Well, that was a walk of shame, wasn't it? In many respects, Helen and Claire made the point in the previous session around the need for balance. So we balanced what the public transport improvements might look like and might cost, both financially and in terms of space, because we need space to put these things in. And the other side of the coin is, where does the space and where does the money come from? Paragraph 611 and the table contained therein, you as an assembly, you've considered this before. So you've talked through that if the size of our ambition is a 15% reduction in traffic, it is about cleaning our air, it is about all those things that we've spoken about, looking at the various, we call them packages, but various approaches, essentially says that actually, to deliver on a scale that we think we need, and to deliver a space and funding that we think we need, we are looking at major interventions around reducing road space on the basis of some form of charging option. And there was clearly not unanimity the last time you discussed it, and there won't be unanimity when we go out for a consultation. I've been doing this 25 years. I've yet to have unanimity on a consultation of this sort of nature. So, but that is the conundrum that we face. You've previously explored, the benefits of the various levers, whether it's pollution-based, whether it's charging-based, what the geography is. And I think what we're suggesting with the roadmap is that the consultation reflects that challenge, and then very much links to the sort of the financials, the size of the prize around the public transport offer. Whether that's delivered before, after, or certainly together, then that's an important conversation that our communities need to have before we take that step forward. Just a couple of things, and then I'll stop, Chair. Equalities is a key element of this, and by that I don't just mean the statutory equalities issues. I mean, in many senses, it comes back to Alex's point in the why. So if I am a hospital porter, what's the impact on me? And this might be equalities issues that you want to reflect on in terms of, is it still truly cheaper to drive into the city and park for free, which still happens a lot, than it is to use alternative modes? So those sort of equalities issues, we've begun that with our equalities integrated assessment, and that will be a key component as we go forward. And then finally, and I will stop, Chair, it is about this timeline to say how we use a consultation in the autumn, that if the Assembly and the Board decide to take that forward, we give a very clear roadmap so that we are not repeating ourselves in future consultations going forward. I'll stop there, Chair, and do my level best to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Peter. I've got Karen Kennedy indicated, followed by Heather Williams.
Thank you, Chair. It's a more general point about the approach to the consultation. I'd just like to ensure that we can give it really careful consideration to ensure that the input into that is as representative as possible so that the approach taken can really reflect the various voices that are out there. We've heard several times today, and we're aware from other meetings, that we generally only hear from a very limited proportion of the constituents that are out there, and it's really important in this case to have a really representative input into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I think it was very delicately put by Mr. Blake about unanimity. I can't even say it this time. And so yes, I think the major concern I have going to any form of charging, at this stage, I'm not supportive of it because I think it's premature. I think we need lots of measures in place and things like that. And also for industry in many ways to catch up. So we're talking about, ULEV cars and things, and I'm going to use delivery. We're using them a lot, aren't we, about deliveries, things from to our door from Amazon, what have you. So a well-known brand, I best not say the name in case we're not meant to, of a delivery company where all of the employees, well, they're not employees, that's the whole point, they're self-employed. They have to use their own vehicles, their own cars, and they're on minimum wage. And those people will be delivering around the city and other areas, and that is their job. So the equalities impact assessment, I think, is going to be probably one of the most important things that's done in relation to this. And unfortunately, we do also know that those on lower incomes or from less privileged backgrounds are less likely to get involved in consultations and things. So, it's... and I do feel that if we were to even consider charging in the very near future, until we've had that natural progression actually of electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles filtering down through the markets, there are many people that are not going to be going out buying brand new cars or even 5 or 6, 7-year-old cars. They're going to be buying 10, 15-year-old cars. And so until those have come through the market, I think it'd be very difficult for many people to get the sort of vehicle that they would need to then not be charged, congestion charge or what have you, if they were going around for the, say a delivery person. And also, the more we charge those people, the less likely they are to be able to get a compliant vehicle or a vehicle that we actually want them to be driving around in. So you're not helping the problem there. You're actually making it worse. So I'm not saying, and I think at the last time we discussed this, back in December 2020, which doesn't seem that long ago, but obviously was, that it's on the cards, and I understand why it's on the table and why it's looked at, but it's too premature to be considering it, and it would really need for lots of multiple factors to enable it to be implemented fairly to everybody. And so that's my major concern. While appreciating I may be a lone voice, Chair, on this side, but it still has to be said.
Thank you very much, Heather. Could I just ask you, because I wasn't quite clear what you were saying. You're pretty against the idea of charging, I think is what you're saying. Are you wanting to ask people what they think as well?
Yes, that's what I was saying about, and part of the issue with the consultation is that people on lower incomes, more often, we don't hear from them, and yet they're the people that's probably going to get affected the most. So how the consultation is done really needs to have thorough care from that equalities area. And I think also we need to, when we see the results of the consultation, we need to know that and bear that in mind as well. Because it's too easy to say 60% of people are supportive. But if you've got 60% of people and you've only got a few hundred people and they're all from a similar background, that's not reflective of the situation. So that's what I'm saying.
So you're in favour of asking people, but we should just make sure that it's as representative as it can be and look at it in that light afterwards.
Yes, and I'm concerned that it won't deliver representative results on something like this.
Thanks very much, Heather. That's helpful. Eileen Wilson.
Thank you. I just, on a similar vein, my concern was about diversity and access, that we need to make sure that people who, for whatever reason, can't cycle, can't get on a bus, and perhaps can't afford the congestion charge, or who have other disabilities, we really need to make sure that we're not, in giving access to the greater number of people, we're not impeding access for people who may not be able to pay congestion charge, or who are forced to pay the congestion charge by their own circumstances, so that too comes into the equalities impact assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. Brian Mills.
Thank you, Chair. So we're on a bit of horns of a dilemma here. And I was somewhat discombobulated by imagining that Councillor Williams was channeling Councillor Dave Bagent and some of his comments about equitability, and that's part of the problem. So do we have a sweet spot somewhere where we've discouraged enough people to make sure the anti-congestion measures work, get some revenue from those people who are prepared to pay, and therefore have a system that's in some sort of equilibrium? We don't want private vehicles in the city centre unless they absolutely have to be there. And, you know, Councillor Wilson's reminder to look after those people who absolutely need a vehicle is well made. So I think I'm just trying to point out, and I don't know if we've got an idea of where that sweet spot is, what sort of numbers of cars we can cope with that then, and the number of buses. You've said, Peter, I think in the past, you know, if what we've got is too many buses, they'll form their own congestion, won't they? So I'm asking the question because I think it needs at least examining about what that balance needs to be. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Claire Ruskin.
I completely agree that we always get an imbalance in responses to consultations, but we have to remember that consultation is only a part of what we're looking at, and this isn't a referendum that we can agree on for any of these questions. We know very well as officers and as people that some people earn nothing, some people are students, some people earn 10k, some people earn 20k, some people earn 70k, etc. And we also know the costs of having to keep a vehicle or renting a scooter or using anything else. So I think we've got an awful lot of intelligent work that we can do that isn't just a referendum and a consultation, to look at the analysis of the cost comparison, the time comparisons, the real calculations backed by data and time, and all the things that go into these looks that are in addition to the referendum of a consultation.
Ian Sollum.
Thank you, Chair. So just 2 points very briefly. On package 3B, I mean, it is highlighted that as electric car technology becomes more prevalent, then that isn't necessarily a sustainable funding solution. I think for the bus network improvements that we've talked about, I think I just want to make sure that really comes out in the consultation, that's not necessarily a long-term sustainable way forward, or at least doesn't appear to be in the way that it's presented. We also mention carbon emissions. I think actually the public would be quite interested to understand exactly how we'd see sort of the carbon emissions reduce in those kinds of different packages. because both package 3B and 3C talk about a reduction in carbon emissions. I think there would be an interesting comparison to see in there. So, thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Rosie Moore.
Thank you. So firstly, I'd just like to preface what I'm going to say by saying I absolutely would support people that need their cars for transport because they cannot use other forms of transport. Then obviously there should be exemptions for them. But I just think we need to be reminded that we're in a climate crisis, and that is going to affect all of us, but it absolutely does not affect people equally. And so it's not just about being fair to people that they're not can't afford to pay any charges, but it's also about making a fairer world where people aren't affected by these health inequalities. And that's the same for air pollution. We don't have terrible air pollution within the city of Cambridge, but it's certainly bad for health, and it's certainly going to get worse over time if the city expands as it's likely to. So we really need to do what we can to improve health outcomes for people. People who are vulnerable to air pollution are often the young, the elderly, people with other health conditions. And so I really think we should have those considerations at the heart of this. I think that improving public transport is in and of itself making a more equal society. It's creating a service for people. As we've said, we want it to be cheap and suitable for. I understand there are some issues where it doesn't reach everybody yet, but we want to make a service that's cheaper and more easily available for everybody. So I think there are real equality issues in not dealing with congestion and air quality. And ironically, I feel that the better buses for everyone, that's my preferred option, personally. But I think that an overall charge is actually fairer because, of course, people don't have readily available access to electric vehicle charging at the moment. And I would also say if we don't deal with the congestion aspect, we will in the future just have congestion and it'll all be electric vehicles. So the air will hopefully be cleaner, but it won't solve the other issues that we have in the city. And lastly, I disagree with you, I'm afraid, on a number of things. I've also mentioned earlier, I'm a bit impatient, and I just wonder whether the work on the clean air zone, some of that, because that is in all of the packages apart from the baseline, I just wonder if some of that work could be done alongside it, because of course a clean air zone will take time to bring in. I think it's around 18 months. But of course, you can't say to the bus companies, in 18 months, all of your buses need to be electric or all of them need to be Euro 6. You need to give them some lead-in time, which will extend it further. And so I just wonder if there's a way of maybe not having a final agreement, but sort of directing and highlighting to the bus companies so that they can really prepare. Thank you.
Thanks, Rosie. Neil Shaler.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if I can ask people to not lose sight of the fact that we have around 100 premature deaths in Cambridge every year due to vehicle pollution, and this is not acceptable. I'm a geneticist. We also study fetal abnormalities and germline genetic damage ongoing. This is a curse on you and your line forever. We're talking about cancers. Even electric cars do produce pollution, and I think Alex knows all about that through their brake lining. So I'd just like people to realize that this is killing people. This is But, you know, even in addition to pedestrians being hit and other kinds of injuries, pollution itself is a killer.
Thanks, Neil. Alex Beckett.
Neil's stolen a large amount of my point there. Yes, I think one thing we do need to make sure we realise, and people responding to the consultation and in general realise as well, is that electric cars, especially in the city, aren't quite the panacea that we like them to be. They obviously reduce down in carbon emissions, but they do still release a lot of the PM 2.5s and 5s, the cancer-causing pollution. And while in the more rural areas, that's actually less of an issue because it falls away very quickly and doesn't get into people's lungs. When we talk about the city itself, especially as it gets more populated, that is a big issue and something that we need to consider. So when we look at any scheme, we do need to make sure that it takes that into account. It mustn't just allow electric cars in, you know, at will and still allow people to die through pollution. Part of that, though, is one thing I think we need to be very careful about here is future-proofing any scheme. I know Peter has spoken about this in the past, that obviously we've seen the electric bus trials and the automated bus trials, but there's a very, very strong possibility that within the next 20, 30 years we might end up with automated taxis. I think I've made this point before, but you look on the streets of Phoenix, Arizona, they're already operating driverless automated taxis. It's coming to San Francisco soon. I hope we've got 30 years before that comes here, but there's a very high chance that it will come very quickly. And when it does, the cost of those journeys will plummet. Something like 90% of the cost of an Uber is the human behind the wheel. So therefore, if we end up with automated taxis running a service that is 10% of the cost of an Uber, it becomes a no-brainer to people. So we need to make sure whatever we come with here is able to solve the problems within Cambridge if that happens as well. We can't simply replace our current petrol-based gridlock with electric automated gridlock. That's not going to work for anyone going forwards. So whatever we design and whatever we put to people, we need to be aware of what's coming as well and not just what we have here. So we just need to make sure we bring everyone on board with all of that as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Simon Smith. Go for it, Simon. We're quite short of time, remember.
Finally. Does that work? Yes. Okay, great. Thanks very much. We do have a real problem in trying to sort out this the funding arrangements. And as far as I can tell, we've got people who are saying that we've got poor people on low incomes who are car users, and they need to be car users just because of the nature of their jobs. And they fall within exemptions. And then we've also got people who are on high income and have got free car parking spaces, workplace parking spaces, and they're probably people who can afford to be charged. And then we have people on low income who've got poor bus services, and they're severely disadvantaged. But in the future, they'll have better bus services, and they'll have significant benefits from that. But there are still groups who might not be able to afford fares, and they qualify for fare exemptions. And then there's everybody else, and what everybody else is going to do is they're going to benefit from seeing less congestion in the streets. They're seeing an overall benefit in respect of climate change, and picking up on the points that Neil's just made about air quality and health impacts. And these are the people who get safer cycling, but we don't appear to have a mechanism to charge for those benefits. But they are going to be key beneficiaries, and that falls across basically everybody. So it's a real conundrum, and it's a matrix, and there's a lot of equality and moral issues at stake here, and things that we can charge for and not charge for. And I think that's probably the reason why we haven't been able to come up with a solution that everybody can agree on. But I'd like to see more effort put into this, because I've seen that the issue's been ducked in the report, but we can't really duck this, because to deliver the scheme, we need to generate £40 million revenue a year. So we've got to come up to a point on options that we're going to need to consult on this at some point. We just can't keep kicking this can down the road.
Thanks, Simon. If I could make some comments myself before we go back to Peter. I'd like to welcome this part of the report. I mean, it's a complex area of the strategy, and I do think it's been written up here very fairly and very concisely. I think the challenge that flows from that is how to do that in more accessible language and simple language in the consultation, which I hope a lot of effort is going to go into. I think it's a similar point to the one I made earlier, that when people are invited to look into some of these subjects, in particular related to charging, there's a human instinct not to give a view until you know an ultimate level of detail about how it would work. And again, I think we are talking about a next consultation stage, which is still at a pretty high level, and we aren't going to get to that level of detail in this consultation stage. So I'm really hoping that we can signpost the fact that there will be a subsequent stage of design, and there will be public input invited to that, and that this isn't people's last chance to have a say about this subject, because I think that we do want people to try and embrace this at the high level of principle, if possible. I mean, I tend to agree with a lot that Rosie said earlier. For me, the simplest way of achieving all of our goals is for there to be fewer car journeys of any kind within the urban area. I think that's even better if it's accompanied by ways of making sure that the public transport alternative is much cleaner than it is today. I too see the clean air zone component as one which ought to be less controversial than the rest of it. I think that we need to understand a little bit for the consultation of about in the way this is presented to the public. What is the relationship between 3A, 3B, and 3C? So, are they alternatives to each other? Are they sequence stages? I think we also need to understand, or the public needs to have it explained, what is the relationship of 3A, 3B, and 3C to the earlier conversation we had about the improved bus services. Because as I read everything that's been put in front of us on this subject, I mean, it's only by landing on 3C that we stand a chance of being able to fund the bus services that I think everyone around the room thought were necessary, and some people thought they should be even better. So I just think we need to make sure that we get across in the consultation the connection between different packages in this section and the different levels of benefit in terms of improved bus services on the other side. I think we have to be able to not only choose our favourite off the cafeteria for better bus services completely in isolation from choosing off the cafeteria for improved road space and funding mechanisms on the other side. I think we have to make clear where the relationship across those exists. Otherwise, we aren't going to get a realistic input to this. And, I think even in this room, I would hope that it's dawned on people that if you really, really like the bus service improvements, especially if you think they should be even better, then it's kind of quite difficult to think how you're going to achieve that without landing on the package 3C. Now, the public may resile then from those bus service improvements. We have to accept that possibility. I hope they wouldn't, but we do need to help them understand that really with the one comes the other and vice versa. So that was a comment I wanted to add in and invite Peter to make the final response on this.
Thank you, Chair. A number of you made sort of given views, so I'll just try and pick up on some points or questions that you've made. So, Karen, Heather, Eileen, important points around the consultation, which is why Tom has already got support in to deal with this, which is why we reference reconnecting with the Citizens' Assembly. We're talking about in the paper getting a group of stakeholders together and having a few sessions with them so we can spend more time on the qualitative side of things. But we absolutely recognise that point, and it's one of the reasons why we've already started the integrated equalities assessment, and we'll continue to do that to pick up these issues. Brian, do I have a sweet spot? I do have a sweet spot, but you know what? That's not my role. I'm here, these are important, and I think Simon touched on it, these are important social and political decisions. This is going to involve trade-off, and my role is to provide you and the board with the information that says, if you did this, this is what happened. If you pulled this lever, eventually this might chug through. I've done this in London. I've got my blueprint in my back pocket now, but that's not going to be the right answer. The right answer is to present the information, following the consultations and gaining people's views to say this absolutely isn't acceptable or this is something that we're interested in. So I think that's sort of my role in terms of taking this forward. Ian, absolutely the point on the difference between the schemes, and I'll pick up on Tim's point at the end in terms of the consultation, and I'll remind the Chair that actually I roped the Transport Working Group in to assist with finalising the consultation and the sessions that we've got arranged. Good, I'm glad everybody remembered, because sharing the pain and glory of this, I think, is quite important, because it's difficult. It's difficult stuff, because we're trying to in one consultation, cover a lot of things. So I think it's important that members are involved in that. Rosie, implementation plan, clean air zone. The implementation plan is going to be a really important part in taking this forward. And so I think going forward, we're going to have to spend time on that, and you will rightly be challenging me to say, well, why couldn't we do this quicker? Or why can't we do that, as a separate work stream? And they're important questions we're going to need to consider at that point, because everybody wants to do this, realistically as quickly as we can. I think it is one of the reasons why we've supported or proposing the board support the Mayor and the combined authority in terms of the zebra bid for the cleaner vehicles, because getting another 30 electric buses in our area is a step in the right direction. In terms of doing that. Simon, I think, outlined the conundrum piece, and I think others have spoken about the health issues, and there's no sort of easy wins on this, and trying to reflect that, both in terms of the consultation, but then maybe with the Citizens' Assembly or the stakeholder group in a little bit more sort of granularity of detail, I think will be important. Hopefully, Chair, that's outlined some of the issues.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. So I'm going to try and wrap this up by saying that I don't believe there has been a big issue coming out of this discussion on this item, which we need to sort of thrust back in the faces of the board at their meeting. I think that all contributions actually throughout all of the segments of this debate have been concerned to make this proposed consultation more effective and more successful. So my conclusion is that, that we support this direction, that there are a long list of tips and steers that members have given about how it can be made more effective, how it should be made more effective, and give us a better result to come back and look at afterwards. So those records are hopefully coming to us through Nick and the minutes. If members are happy with that and don't believe that's an unfair summary of the discussion, I propose to end this item here. I see some nods around the room, so thank you for that. Well, we have now some limited time to talk about item 8 on our agenda. This is active travel experimental traffic regulation orders. It's on between page 100 and 126. And I'm first of all going to be calling for the public questions, of which there are 3. Officer response to the public questions. We'll then get the officer presentation, and then we're going to have the assembly discussion. I would ask everyone, from officers to members, to try and be reasonably concise, recognising that we may be lucky to have half an hour, but I would prefer you to think of 20 minutes. Thank you. Who am I calling forward? I am calling forward Wilma to read out the question from Linny Purr.
Yes, Chairman. The question reads as follows. This question is an appeal to the GCP to carry out its science from a systems perspective and see road closures as being about justice, not chiefly about transport. Closing a road to through traffic is a socially divisive act. This is a moral issue, and it is immoral to use people as collateral damage. In the meeting notes for each closure that is recommended, it states it is inevitable that some traffic would be displaced. This means that while some get to live in cul-de-sac, green and great with enhanced active travel, virtually no traffic past their doors and increased value on their homes, others inevitably are forced to take their traffic congestion, emissions and danger as well as their own. Road closures also harm the local economy. Commuters who live beyond cycling distance, the elderly and disabled, and all those with mobility problems, all users of the road for necessary journeys, and locals forced to take lengthy detours around the barrier. The environment will suffer as alternative journeys are much longer. When all the rhetoric round it's for COVID, cycling, speeding, lorries, climate crisis, trial only is done, you are still left with the policy being either fair or unfair. National evidence, Ealing et al., proved that road closures and cycle lanes are not all you need to change travelling behaviour. Traffic evaporation was a false claim. Other equitable solutions and incentives are available. Please govern by consent from a holistic perspective and manage interdependency. Put justice and the environment at the heart of transport policies. If not, children in the side roads will be forced to live in high traffic neighbourhoods. One question will be, who is it who will go and explain to these children why their lungs are not as important as the ones that you give a low traffic neighbourhood to? And I just should mention at the end that Ms Purr is representing the vast majority of residents in Havenfield retirement flats on Arbury Road, for whom she is spokesperson. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Wilma. I now want to ask Kirsty Howarth to come forward to ask the next question. And while she's doing that, I'd like to say that she's speaking on behalf of Nick Flynn, Robert Rawlinson, and a number of other local residents. And I want particularly to thank Mr. Flynn and Mr. Rawlinson for agreeing to submit a combination of their original questions to kind of bring this point together. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Kirsty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here today representing over 20 households who are in support of keeping the ETRO. I've got 4 questions. Questions 1, 3 and 4 are from residents, and question 2 is from Nick Flynn. He's not a resident, but he works at Addenbrooke's as a medical professional. Question 1. Given the officer's report states no negative evidence to support the proposal to rescind the experimental order, and there is clear evidence the objectives have been met, as well as the proven popularity of the scheme with residents and non-residents, what is the justification for reopening the road? On whether it should be retained, the Luard-Sedley-Taylor scheme scored more highly in responses from non-residents than it did from residents. 61% of all respondents feeling that the restriction should be retained and made permanent, more than for the schemes in Newtown, Nightingale Avenue or Stories Way. Question 2 from Nick Flynn. What would be the council's reason for reopening the road when this would make the roads less safe for cyclists and pedestrians? Both the council and central government have stated objectives to encourage people out of their cars and to use other more environmentally friendly modes of transport. The GCP report states it was used by over 700 cyclists per day. The report states consultation responses show it has been successful in improving walking and cycling and making the area safer. Also, there is clear evidence previously provided to the council on the frequency of accidents before the closure of the road. According to the GCP's own report, there were 2 serious and 6 slight injuries on Luard or Sedley-Taylor Road, including their junctions with Hills Road and Long Road, from 2017 to the start of the trial period in 2020. No collisions have been recorded during the ETRO trial period. Question 3. Notwithstanding the intended impact of the road closure to displace traffic onto Long Road away from Luard and Sedley-Taylor roads that have become a classic residential rat run, what evidence is there to show a net increase in traffic and or pollution levels that could be used as a justification to remove the road closure? The officer's report states there is no data to support that the displacement has been any worse than for any other road closure sites. There is no proposal to rescind any of those 5 ETRO schemes. In addition, the officer's report states that there is no air quality data to support or disagree that any traffic displacement has negatively affected pollution levels. And question 4, given the justification for rescinding the order is an alleged increase in complaints to the signals team regarding the Hills Road and Long Road junction, where is the evidence on changes in journey times and what consideration has been given to the impact of the reopening of the nearby Fendon Road roundabout in July 2020? This change, shortly before the Luard Road experimental traffic order came into effect, would also have been expected to increase traffic volumes on Long Road independently of the Luard Road scheme. That ends the questions, but I would like to have a final remark. The reason why I am here, I feel it very important I am here, is because I was involved in an accident involving a pedestrian and 2 motorists. The cyclist was a teacher at Long Road going to work, and the other vehicle was somebody who worked in Addenbrooke's and was just going to a meeting. And I think that barrier is very important. It stays there because it will prevent an accident. And I'm a mother of 3 children, and it is a concern.
Thank you very, very much, Kirsty. Thank you for that testimony. We will reflect on that. So the next question is from Anna Williams on behalf of CamCycle.
Thank you, Chair. CamCycle welcomes this report. It's good to see detailed data on traffic flows, journey time, speed, collisions and air quality, in addition to the consultation responses. As the report says, these schemes included the long-term goal to create a better environment for active travel and support the government's target of half of urban journeys being walked or cycled by 2030. Key metrics, therefore, are: number 1, the number of people who use these routes as a pedestrian or cyclist; 2, the improvement in actual and perceived safety, which is the main barrier to active travel, people feeling that roads are unsafe; and number 3, a reduction in motor traffic, which may create a route suitable for all ages and abilities without the need for expensive protective infrastructure. The report shows that all schemes were successful, with routes rebalancing transport in favour of walking and cycling. Over 80% of those travelling in Carlisle Road, Silver Street and Luard Road are doing so actively now, and daily levels of cycling in Carlisle Road are approaching those on popular routes such as the Riverside Bridge. According to the government's inclusive cycling guidance, LTN 120, the level of motor traffic on Bateman Street now makes it an appropriate route for all types of cyclists, whereas the 4,000 plus vehicle movements before, from the 2018 data, created a barrier to many. CamCycle would like to see all these schemes retained and improved. It is completely unacceptable that Loire Road has been recommended for removal when it has achieved its aims. 1, there are high levels of cycling on this route. 2, a majority, 61%, support the retention of the filter. 3, 63% of respondents say the road is now safer. And 4, collisions and anecdotally non-reported near misses, as just mentioned, have been reduced. How can the GCP claim one of its transport aims is to prioritise greener and active travel when here it is placing motor traffic flow and driver convenience above safer walking and cycling? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. I'm going to ask Peter to respond to those questions briefly.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the question from Linny Pure, I think the issues raised are reflective of the conversation you just had in terms of city access, in terms of what is the holistic approach, the impact in terms of health, and the different geographies in terms of a cul-de-sac comparison with a main road. And so it's right that that's reflected within the conversation that you've had and the proposed consultation that the GCP is looking at in the autumn period. In terms of the question from Nick Flynn and Robert Rawlinson, the journey time data demonstrates an increased eastbound delay on Long Road following the closure of Loire Road. Given that impact, it's right that that is considered alongside the benefits of Loire Road for the Assembly and the Board to consider. It is correct that journey times have changed. They've fluctuated during the pandemic, but there has been a demonstrable increase on Long Road. And as traffic volumes come back, it is likely that that increase will continue. But as I say, that is worth consideration within and alongside the benefits on Loire Road. The information around road collisions is provided by the police, and that's the information that we follow on a national level. A similar response to Anna Williams in terms of displacement and moving the traffic to the eastbound Long Road and the impact of delays in that area, and again consideration that is looked at alongside the benefits, the clear benefits, including the community support along Loire Road. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Going to come right back to you for the presentation of the report, or unless you want to tell us it's taken as read, but...
Well, I just want to be very brief, Chair, if I may. So this is an arrangement that we agreed with the County Council some 18 months ago. The Executive Board will not be taking the final decision. It will be making a recommendation to the County Council Highways and Transport Committee. But because the Board decided to support the County Council in taking forward ETROs and paying and undertaking the consultation for these, it's right that we give a view to the Highways and Transport Committee. The schemes are as outlined, Chair, and I think clearly of the 6 schemes, the Loire Road is the one that's grabbed understandably the sort of views and the correspondence that you've received. The emerging recommendation, and to be clear, it's an emerging recommendation, it's not the final recommendation to the Board, is that the closure is rescinded. Since publication of the papers, I've been asked whether this is fixable in terms of can we keep or could we make a recommendation that Loire Road is continue to be closed, and can we manage the impact on Long Road? And the answer that we've given to a number of individuals, and I'll now state here, is that if GCP were to undertake improvements with the County Council to traffic signals on Long Road, including Addenbrooks, that would manage and mitigate the disbenefit that appears on the eastbound approach. Now, that is not strictly within accordance of the ETRO process as we set up, so the executive board would have to agree to undertake to do that if you wanted to manage, or if they wanted to manage the impact on Long Road. I hope that's helpful for your deliberations, Chair.
Thank you very much, Peter. I think it will be. So I'm going to try and make sure that we can move to the important part of the decision making as fast as possible. So we have 6 schemes here. 5 of them, that's all of them except Luard Road, have a recommendation from officers to be made permanent. I'm first going to ask, and I'm looking for your support in not turning this into a debate unless it has to be. Is there any dissent from that recommendation for those 5 schemes that they are made permanent? Does anyone wish to speak on any of those 5 schemes? Carlisle Road, Nightingale Avenue, Newtown, Stories Way and Silver Street. Okay, Alex?
Sorry, very briefly, I just wanted to speak on Nightingale Avenue. I've had a lot of feedback and it's very mixed on Nightingale Avenue. Much like Luard Road, a lot of the concern is from people on Queen Edith's Way and the knock-on to travel. So I was wondering whether the board would be able to, when this comes back to the Highways Committee, ask the Highways Committee to look at what mitigations can go in place for Queen Edith's Way. I know previously there were proposals for cycle lanes and things like that, and whether we could ask the board to ask the Highways Committee to take a look at that again. Thank you.
Sorry, noted. Okay, so that's a rider, not a dissent. So can I assume here, seeing no other hands, that the Assembly has is willing to support the officer's recommendation? They're happy for that to go forward for those 5 schemes. That's progress. Thank you, folks. Now let's go to Luard Road, where obviously we're looking at a officer recommendation not to make the scheme permanent. Now, I'm taking my lead from Peter's introduction here. I am aware that a number of members have indicated an unhappiness with that recommendation. Converting what Peter sort of indicated as a possibility, if that's the view of the Assembly, if we were apparently, and officers have advised, if we were to agree, the following would be a workable alternative, and that would be that the GCP Joint Assembly supports making permanent the Luard Road closure, but to mitigate impact on other roads, requests work is undertaken on traffic signals in the area. And so that's the workable alternative to the officer recommendation. So I don't want to make this an over laborious debate, because at the end of the day it's going to come down to a finite decision, and I am going to take this to a vote in order to resolve it. What I would like to know, please, to get to this point, is there anyone who wants to speak in support of the officer recommendation? Well, Heather, I'm not asking for speeches. Are you wanting to support the officer recommendation? Okay, ask your question, please.
Sorry. It's a procedural question. The graphs that were shared with us were very helpful. Have they been shared in the public domain? Because I think that's a procedural point.
Yes, they have. They're on the website.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I was just scanning around the room and I didn't see anyone who wanted to say they supported the officer recommendation. Okay. Is there anyone then who has any other view about this? Rosie?
Sorry, it was more another point of clarification. I absolutely understand that this has improved things on Luard Road and Sedley Taylor Road, but I wonder if there's more of an impact other than increased traffic jams on Long Road. Obviously, Long Road is quite heavily used by young people going to college and school, and it's got very narrow pavements, and I just wondered whether there had been other, because obviously it's a balance, isn't it? And I wonder if there are other negatives that impacts.
So inevitably, if you move traffic from one road to another, the other road has impacts beyond just the numbers of vehicles. So stationary vehicles on Long Road will be throwing out nasties through their exhaust pipes and other parts of the vehicles that will not be good. Clearly, it will be a less attractive environment to cycle and walk and everything else. So that's the issue and the concern about the general displacement.
Sorry. Are there any other questions? Because shortly I'm going to ask for a vote on this. Alex.
Less of a question. Can I make a point, though?
Yep.
So I just wanted to make the point. I'm the local member for Queen Edith's division, which technically doesn't include this, but Queen Edith's ward is where Sedley Taylor is. So I've got a lot of communication with local residents about this. It is obviously the most supported scheme to remain, with 60% support against 34% that didn't want it. The point here is that Sedley Taylor, previous to this, was used as a rat run. It's to avoid the lights at the junction there, where we're talking about improved signalling for members that don't know the area. And therefore, I think when we look at our city access, we've been talking again about reducing rat runs, about putting people on the roads that they're designed to be. So to me, it seems like madness to vote to reinstate a rat run into things. And while we do need to help the other roads and we need to improve the signalling, it just seems slightly silly to reintroduce a rat run. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I would just like to say that my understanding of these schemes is that it goes with the territory that there will be displacement at some level. And so we shouldn't be completely surprised that there is some in this, and we've been able to measure it somewhat. There probably would be in the case of the others if we'd been able to measure it. I think that the solution to that displacement in the short term sounds reasonable to be the signals work. But in the long term, it's the previous item on our agenda, which is trying to reduce car journeys in the city. And that is the strategic endpoint, I think, that we would like to end up with. So what I would like to do is to just formally put this to the vote. Another question, Heather?
Not a question, but just a point for your motion, that because obviously there's concerns on other things, whether the board would commit to some more longer term monitoring along Long Road and things like that, which might then be able to inform residents of the impact going forward. Because I noticed from some of what we've been given, it's because we don't have a wealth of historical data and things like that. So I think a commitment that we're not just going to do this and then that's what you get, that we'll do a long-term investment in the displacement.
Officers, is that a reasonable...
That would seem like a sensible approach on this basis.
Never been accused of being sensible before, Chair. Thank you.
I'm not trying to judge you, Heather, but the point is helpful, and so we will add that to the feedback to the board. So the GCP Joint Assembly supports making permanent the Luard Road closure, but to mitigate impact on other roads, requests work is undertaken on traffic signals in the area, plus Heather's rider, which we will already note. Could I see those in favour of that as our view? Okay, that looks like a unanimous position. And so I note that Richard Preston came along to support this discussion, hasn't been asked any questions, but thank you, Richard, anyway, for your work on these schemes. And I know that is quite an exercise. So we finished today's agenda, and it remains for me to say that our next meeting is on Thursday, the 18th of November at 2 o'clock. This seems to have been, Neil, it's just...
Very briefly,
we're not going back to earlier discussions, hopefully.
Yeah, just a little announcement. I want to thank the GCP and Peter for reinstating the hedgehog escape routes from the Chisholm Trail cattle grates. I know there are some...
It needs to be an item on the agenda, I'm afraid. You know the routine. We can't...
Some small prickly people in my
I
division are
understand
very
we all
happy.
have wards to represent, but it has to be on the agenda. So there is no any other business, as you know. So thank you very much for your contributions. I think we've got clear lead for the board on their deliberations, and that's what we came to do today. So thank you for everyone. Thank you. Bye.